Why are men getting dumped on all the time? Because culture has spoken and apparently men suck. That's right, men, especially you young men who, according to the predominant cultural narrative, have simultaneously pulled off being fat, lazy, stupid, worthless, unambitious incels that no one needs, while at the same time somehow managing to all carefully work together in order to ensure the ascendancy of an oppressive patriarchal system which works to thwart the best efforts of noble progressive feminist leaders simply trying to make the world a more equitable place. Or at least that's what they're being told. And more specifically, that's what young men are being told. And young men have now undergone a decades-long assault on just about anything masculine. Because after all, masculinity, or more specifically, the ill-defined concept of toxic masculinity, has become the go-to excuse for all the injustices of the past, present, and almost certainly the future. If you're an 18-year-old man, you have no doubt been subjected to a litany of struggle sessions posing as education, where you are informed that the future is female. And if you would just recognize and abandon the toxicity of your masculinity, then the ladies can start to rebuild society without you. But here's the thing. We currently live in what is arguably the most feminist version of society to ever exist. So why are we acting as if nothing has changed since the Neanderthals? And to prove this point, let's look at three categories that we use to measure progress within society. Education. Our entire modern education system seems to cater to girls far more than it does boys. Boys are often treated as defective girls in the classroom. In fact, they're drugged at increasingly higher rates in order to accommodate the system. When it comes to higher education, 57.3% of the students are female. When it gets into post-secondary students, 57.9% are female. There's no doubt that higher ed caters more to women. There are between 2,000 to 3,000 distinct scholarships prioritizing women within our higher education system. How many exist for men? Well, not very many, especially for white men. How about economics? Well, while there's a lot of talk about the gender pay gap, the problem is that when you actually look at the numbers, no, women are not being paid 75 cents on the dollar. In fact, the only way you can even get to numbers like that is if you take everyone working full-time, regardless of their occupation, and then compare salaries. In fact, it turns out when you actually account for things that matter, the pay gap gets reduced to just about nothing. And when we compare other factors, in some cases, the pay gap actually reverses. Thomas Sowell pointed out that as far back as 1971, single women in their 30s who had worked continuously since high school earned slightly more than men of the same description. And it's not just back then, right? In response to criticisms about the gender pay gap, Google decided to do an internal study in order to figure out what they could correct for and how they could fix this horrible injustice, only to find out that at Google, the pay gap was reversed in favor of women. Women also currently hold a record number of corporate board seats according to the Russell 3000 Index. No, it's not still on parity with men, but a lot of that can be chalked up to the fact that many women leave the workforce in order to make time for kids. What about political representation? Well, over the past 3 decades, it's increased significantly across the Senate, House, governorships, etc. This has led to an increase not only in female representation when it comes to lawmaking, but certain legal advantages and grant funding specifically set aside for women. So there's no question that in categories of education, workforce, politics, women have been making meteoric advances. On the whole, it seems like women should be thrilled with all of the progress that has been made socially, economically, educationally, and politically. But they're not. Young women, and more specifically, young liberal women, are actually identifying higher instances of mental health issues than ever before. And guess who's to blame? Men, the patriarchy, toxic masculinity. And guess what? Men have had it. Young men especially. And you can see the proof right here. While women are becoming far more liberal, young men are becoming far more conservative than they've ever been since we started tracking it. What's more interesting is how many on the left try to explain this phenomenon, from denying that it exists, to suggesting that it's all just about despair, to claiming that young men have just checked out, to hoping it's all temporary and not really a trend at all. But here's the reality. Progressive feminism did not just try to advance the interests of women. They made young men their enemy, and the political left went right along with it, embraced it, and even made it a core part of their messaging. And this outright animosity towards men and masculinity is palpable at all levels of society when there's never been more opportunities for women, many of which comes at the deliberate exclusion of men. And that's the sticking point. Young men have started to realize that it was never going to be enough. One more program, scholarship, economic set-aside, parade, struggle session, none of it was going to be sufficient. And now, they aren't buying it anymore. They've realized that young men provide the bulk of the people responsible for things like fighting fires, policing streets, heavy construction, not to mention fighting wars. And they're asking the question, doesn't any of that deserve some level of appreciation? And if men really are the horrible, brutish, patriarchal monsters you claim, then how did women get any rights in the first place? Was it not because men actually agreed with the moral arguments being made? So why are young men choosing to revolt against this system? Because it went from equality before the law to despising men for being men. The only question now is, who will those young men listen to for advice as they revolt? Will it be the ones who tell them to be strong, competent, capable, and intelligent so they can get what they want and enact revenge? Or will it be those who tell them to be strong, competent, capable, and intelligent so they can serve a noble purpose on behalf of their faith, their family, and their country? Well, that question remains to be answered, but one thing is for certain. The current status quo is about to end, and it should.